Welcome to the first official episode of the LightWeavers Book Club. Beginning with this episode, we're starting a new series on the book Flourish by Bob Podolsky. In fact, Bob will be joining us for the remainder of the series as a special guest that we can ask questions to. Anyone who wants to join can, of course, ask any questions. And I'll be posting each week about how far we got in the book so that you guys can follow along on your own if you'd like. Or you can just catch up to these recordings later. We're going to start. There was a bit of chatter in the beginning, and then, I kind of cut that part out, and we're going to walk right immediately into the book, beginning now. Flourish, an alternative to government and other hierarchies, by Robert Podolsky. Who's that, Bob? With Clyde Cleveland. This is the 3rd edition, not even available in physical format yet. Listen to this dedication. I dedicate this book to the memory of my loving wife of 38 years, Leah Frankel Podolsky, without whose unstinting patience and support my research and writings would never have been possible. Thank you, Gypsy. I miss you. Bob Podolsky. Preface by Clyde Cleveland. Here's a quote by Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. If you just picked up this book and are reading this preface to decide whether to continue, then I pray with all my heart, mind, and soul that the words I have set forth here inspire you as you've never been inspired before. I implore you not only to read this amazing and utterly revolutionary book, but also to immediately get involved in the Titania Project, with all the energy, enthusiasm, and resources you can bring to the effort. This book is powerful beyond description. I will do my best, however, to explain just what it means to me and how profoundly it can change our entire world. This book truly represents the new model we've been looking for, to replace the bureaucratic institutions that enslave us. Do you want world peace, complete prosperity for anyone who aspires to it, a healthcare system designed to help you be healthy rather than to make the pharmaceutical industry wealthier, less crime, less drug abuse, better education, a cleaner environment, less discrimination, safe, healthy food that's not genetically altered? Then read this book and learn how you can help create a transition to a system that will provide all of us with all these glorious benefits and much, much more. Bucky Fuller was correct that when you spend your energy and time fighting against firmly established institutions, you are going to end up demoralized, exhausted, and discouraged. I know. I've spent a lifetime railing against the system. I've approached it from every possible angle, including as a Republican, Democrat, Socialist, and Libertarian. I've been a director or founder of several organizations designed to reform the tax system, educate people about the GMO scam, create world peace, help create the first ever constitutional sheriff convention, etc. I've run for office twice and written 2 books in order to educate people about the absolute and total corruption of our government and other major institutions. It took me too long to understand that working through either political party is a total waste of time. They are both controlled by the same interest groups. It took me still longer to realize that all of the divisions among us are created, promoted, exaggerated, and exacerbated by those who rule us. To divide and conquer is a very effective technique, and it has been used for thousands of years to control people. I finally realized that all of our political parties, organized religions, labor unions, banking and financial cartels, and many of our major corporations work together to protect each other and the power elite behind the scenes. The current system benefits them, and they will work to keep the system just the way it is. I've never read any book or heard anyone describe our present system and its faults as clearly as Robert Podolsky does in this book. He spent a lifetime doing research to bring out this knowledge. Describing the present corrupt, top-down, force-based system we've lived under on this planet for nearly 8,000 years is only a small part of what he does in this book. The real meat of this book is the solution presented to create an alternative system. The author is absolutely correct about the importance of ethics. Without a system of ethics which becomes the agreed upon prime directive of the vast majority of our society, we are doomed. Anyone who has studied the founding of the American Republic knows that, for the most part, a very high level of ethical conduct pervaded commerce and business in the 1700s. The founders knew that without high moral and ethical standards, a freedom-based, bottom-up model of governance would not last for long. An ethical code is only part of the solution presented. The author also presents a model for bottom-up governance that is applicable to any organization, including governments, unions, corporations, religions, nonprofit organizations, or any other organization of human beings that's imaginable. From the early Israelis and Anglo-Saxons, who used the principle of 10 family units, to the successful Iroquois tribal system, from the amazingly prosperous and entrepreneurial Gore Enterprises to the success story of Visa under CEO and visionary D. Hock, from the Deming-inspired corporate model in Japan to the employee-owned modern companies becoming more popular every day, the examples of bottom-up, freedom-based, non-coercive models of human organization abound. The end result of all bottom-up organizational models is more freedom, more creativity, more happiness, more productivity, more harmony, and more success on all levels of human activity and behavior. It is a new age, and that new age will not come about from a policy or a bill passed in the U.S. Congress. You will not change the U.S. Congress because that entity is part of a system that is very effectively doing its job. Its job is not, however, to represent you or to make your life any better. Its job is to make those who control the system behind the scenes more powerful and wealthier than they are now. It is critical to understand that, in their minds, they will never have enough power or wealth. No government or entity that is part of the existing system will save us. Do not think that the United Nations will save us, or that it is even benign. Think again. The United Nations and all its spawn were created by the power elite that control governments of this world, and the biggest and wealthiest banking and financial institutions in the world. For explanations of this fact, read Confessions of an Economic Hitman by Perkins and The Creature from Jekyll Island by Griffin. We must create a new system based on a new model, as Fuller says, if we want to change. That model, as explained in this book, exists now and can be used by us to improve our lives in virtually every way starting today. As the new system grows and takes on more of the tasks that we have mistakenly delegated to top-down bureaucratic governments, corporations, religions, and unions, we will see those ancient, useless, coercive, and damaging institutions simply disappear. They will vanish as useless relics of a much less evolved society. It is entirely up to you to create this new system and make it a reality. The new age will not happen by itself. It will be created by people like you and me. And I promise you that the process will be fun, profitable, and fulfilling on all levels. It is up to each of us to make this new model a reality. Our children and grandchildren's lives depend on it. And there's a quote by Albert Einstein. Everything that is really great and inspiring is created by the individual who can labor in freedom. By Clyde J. Cleveland, entrepreneur, ecologist, public speaker, and political historian. Author of Restoring the Heart of America and Common Sense Revisited. Married for 43 years with 4 children and 7 grandchildren.
I think it's a little grandiose. Makes me blush a little bit.
My biggest question was to ask you, how does it feel to hear all this being said about yourself?
Well, it's gratifying on one level, and it's I don't often think of myself in those terms as the author, but I'm pleased to know that somebody does.
Yeah, it's other people are often much nicer to us than we are to ourselves.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
See, I was wondering. I've heard the Buckminster Fuller quote in the past from different people. and a lot more recently in the last 2 or 3 years from different people. What was the context? Because I have a little Buckminster Fuller book that was a graduation address that he did, and I kind of get a sense of what his life career was, but I kind of thought he was working on behalf of the establishment. So that's why I'm curious as to the nature of that quote, if you're more familiar with the background on it.
Maybe they thought he was too.
Well,
I don't know. I know he was part of. I think he was part of things like Manhattan Project or something of that nature. I mean, maybe some MK Ultra stuff. He was involved in some of those kinds of projects for sure. Maybe not those exact ones.
I think that his real claim to fame is that he early on learned to think outside the box, to think for himself, and to not accept what was commonly believed. And that takes a real talent. It has been shown statistically on many occasions that in any given field, the creative work that is done happens on the fringes of that group that is involved in it. That the mainstream in any field is not very creative. They mostly follow along, do as they're told, and believe what they're told to believe. But out on the fringes are the creative people who refuse to accept the mainstream worldview. And I tend to think this is true. My own experience, I have a lot of evidence in my own experience of this being so. So I think that's really where he's coming from, not so much that his particular background prepared him better than it prepares most people, but rather that he just refused to be stuck in the box or cartelized. And I had a similar experience that long ago decided not to join a cartel, which meant a lot of sacrifices on my part because I could have made a lot of money joining a cartel and chose rather to be relatively poor and free. And I've never regretted that decision.
I think the quality of the work you've done after that shows itself, because I think if you had compromised your values in some way, your work wouldn't have come out the same way. You might even have been afraid to write certain passages of the books that you did end up writing because you looking at that passage would have kind of revealed your betrayal of yourself and of your values.
Yeah, and I won't do that.
Yeah, from the perspective of people that might want to control a society or something, I think somebody like Buckminster Fuller is one of those guys that if you don't control him, he's going to be a real wild card. Like you basically have to at least hire him because if not, he's going to be a real problem. They can try to give him a project to do. Maybe he'll help them, maybe he won't, but at least he's busy.
I get it. Yeah.
Are you familiar, looking at the quote, now this is Cleveland's references, but I imagine it's based on what you wrote, on the different corporate structures. Are you familiar with Trammell Crow? Trammell Crow?
No, can't say I am.
Long about when Trump first came out, to become famous as the big real estate developer, there was a great quote. Trammell Crow is a real estate developer, commercial real estate developer from Texas. He's probably passed away now. But the joke was that, yes, Donald Trump can look out of his office in New York City and see all he owns. Trammell Crow could look outside his office and not see all he owns because he owns half the continent.
Wow.
It's a very, the Trammell Crow company still exists as far as I know. in commercial real estate. So they just owned all sorts of properties all over the country.
Mm.
And the reason why I mention them is that their methodology was very similar, as I understand it, to J.C. Penney's, where, you know, in the 80s, as everybody has to rewrite history and say, well, we're not going to call our employees, we're going to call them associates, just like J.C. Penney. It's like, well, yeah, because J.C. Penney really had associates. The managers of the stores were part of a partnership. And that was the same sort of model that Trammell Crow used, in which the property managers of these commercial properties could end up being partners. And the you know, the corporate, what do you call it? The corporate map diagram.
Yeah, the organizational chart.
The organizational chart was really like, you know, like just lots of little fingers going out.
It's a good model.
Yep, and so the you know, the young property manager, leasing agent could aspire to actually being a partner in that commercial property, and then moving on up, and so it was a really clever system that you know, put an ownership stake, you know, in which they were real associates. And as I understand it, the J.C. Penney model of the stores were that the managers also became partners in the company, so they really were associates, not just the
right.
The verbal fake stuff that they, you know, gave us later on. Feel good capitalism versus real creative stuff. But so I just wondered if you'd been familiar with Trammell Crow or not, because that's
I'm not familiar with that. I am familiar with some other companies that have a similar model. For example, the Gore-Tex manufacturer is put together that way, and originally Visa was put together that way. Unfortunately, Visa wound up getting sold to a traditional corporate hierarchy, and they lost that advantage. But when Visa was first formed, they organized. They had a flat organization. There was no hierarchic structure, and within 3 years, it became the highest revenue company on the planet. So it's a good model. It's a very good model.
I was wondering if oh my God, I lost it. I had a great
It'll come back.
Now I get it. Now I remember. What's your view on the franchise model? Because I've seen both sort of points of view that franchising is very capitalistic, and you know, and I don't know. What do you think of franchising?
Well, that's a little bit like saying, what do you think of food, or what do you think of human beings? There are good franchises and bad franchises. And
No, I'm just talking about the structure.
Well,
not the type of businesses, but just the structure.
The basic model that some group of people has developed a successful model, and they will teach others to use that model in exchange for a quid pro quo. To me, that makes perfect sense. That seems very ethical to me. If assuming it's done right, assuming that the details remain ethical. Does that make sense to you?
I see it as a neo-feudalistic model. It really is feudalism, and
really,
yeah, and I think we saw that proof, you know, in these last few years, but even before, I think, even before COVID, you had the situation where McDonald's Corporation wanted to sell the breakfast foods all day, even though the franchisees did not want that because it wasn't a very profitable thing. And so you had you know, all the fluffy feel good stuff suddenly went out the window, you know, and corporate could force the franchisees to do that, even though it was, you know, economically detrimental.
I see.
And then
To me, that sounds.
Contract.
What was that?
Maybe it's the nature of the contract. Like the way
Yeah.
Bob described it, if that were the entire contract, just those two sentences or whatever, like that'd be great. But depends maybe what else they put in that contract that gives them some kind of power over you.
Right.
yeah, that's why I say it's feudalistic. I mean, because, you know, obviously the feudal system allows for you to work your land, but you still have, you know, tribute to the landlord, and um, and in the end, the landlord controls your livelihood. So it's
Well, to me, what I'm hearing is that it can be feudalistic, and I'm not hearing that it has to be. That it's inherent in the basic model. It depends on the contract, and
gotcha.
the
Okay.
contract is everything. The devil's in the details, shall we say? That if it's written up and presented and carried out ethically, then it's not a feudal system. But if it's run the other way, then it is a feudal system. So it might be or it might not be, depending on the details.
Yes, and I think that's but I think um, the franchise system is because of those contracts, because it's different than uh, and I'm going to play the age card for us, Don. Sorry, but Best Western, True Value, those are examples of non-feudalistic sort of associations that I would say are better than franchising, because it keeps the independence of the
Mm-hmm.
local owner better. But I mean,
Yeah,
this is just a tangent, but I just I just wanted to.
it's an interesting and relevant tangent. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, that's what that was covered in part of the preface. There was that they were talking about companies that are based on this kind of a model. Yeah, I think another key factor there too is that the feudalistic system, as I remember from school, which 30% of what they told me is true, but roughly, didn't it begin with the enclosure movement? So the difference is that in the feudal system, the land you're working wasn't given to you and you didn't buy it; it was yours, and someone came and told you it was his.
Oh, that's interesting.
Actually, I was just reading something on the agricultural revolution this morning, and they were talking about the transition from prior and certainly like in the initial phases of agricultural revolution, people were their own landowners, but then as violence came along, the knights and the kind of the wealthy landowners essentially gave up their land ownership to larger land owners so that they could be protected. And that's essentially the origination of the feudal system, was that your landlord was your protector. And so to a large degree, the peasants basically gave up ownership in their land so that they could have that insurance that they wouldn't be killed.
Yes, and I see that as very analogous as what the franchise system does. So instead of opening your own local restaurant, you're seeking the protection of a bigger brand.
Yeah. Well, I think in a lot of ways, the way I did, I worked for 7-Eleven in the Southland Corporation for a few years, and I did 7-Eleven construction projects where I built gas stations and 7-Eleven convenience stores around Chicago. And for the most part, it was a very lucrative business for the 7-Eleven, because they deferred all their responsibilities to either the franchisee or the landowner, and there's a bunch of interesting things. But like you said, there's so many controls that you really have the business owner doesn't do anything more than just collect the customer's money and do the books. Other than that, everything else is, computer controlled. Even the ordering, the inventory is all outsourced, and so there's very little control in a lot of these things. And if you look at most of the most regions these days, even the small towns, the mom and pops are being going bankrupt,
Mhm.
and these franchised companies are coming in. They get incredible financing type deals. They get incredible deals with the state governments as far as property taxes and all these other things. And there's no way that the mom and pops can compete with them. And so they go out of business. And so you get the franchise taco places and the franchise pizza places and all that kind of stuff. And they just, they run the other market. They run the other smaller businesses out of business.
Yeah, and I think we can look at the landscape, literally and figuratively, that it's so easy to say it looks like a free market arrangement, but the devil in the details is that it's not. And you can look at you can look at a patch of land, and it looks like farmers are farming locally, or would have, at the time, and yet the devil is in those details, that it's not as
yeah,
as
most
free.
of the franchisees that I saw in Chicago were Pakistani. They were Pakistani family that that they opened one, and then they'd open it, then they'd bring their cousin or the brother, and they just keep opening more. And to some degree, they would accept those kind of ironclad contracts because they didn't really know any better. And they were willing to work for minuscule amounts of money.
Yeah. But there's a lot of people who are merchants, ethnically merchants, and whether they get sucked into the franchise or not, they're definitely willing to do the work, the long hours, and the sort of tribal financing, family financing that we got practically brainwashed out of. And I find it really fascinating being here in Detroit that, one of the biggest secrets, I think, and not really a secret, but just, clever, interesting trivia. Barry Gordy Jr. was an auto worker, but he started Motown Records with a family business model. So he went to his family and got money to start the company. And you can see at the museum, you can see the founding paper, posted on the wall, with the and that's very that's how a lot of businesses, especially like in these convenience stores or gas stations, these ethnic groups are still doing that. Uncles, aunts, cousins, all pool money to be able to start the business, and then they work together to treadmill it on to the next one and build it up to the next one.
I'll just say a Buckminster Fuller reference there. We were talking about him earlier. One of the books that Buckminster Fuller came out with, I think it was his last book, was called The Grunch of Giants. And it was a condemnation of, big government and corporations. That's probably where that quote came from, but I'm not positive on that.
That makes sense, yeah. It makes sense that would be his last book, too. Yeah, you're done.
Whether he wanted it to be or not.
Right. I'm going to move on with forward. The purpose of this book is recruitment. not literary excellence, not academic showmanship, nor philosophical discussion, just recruitment. It is intended for readers of above-average intelligence who are keenly dissatisfied with the world's status quo and who want to do something that will have a meaningful and beneficial impact on the future of mankind. I became aware of the organizational concept described herein in 1984, and have spent the years since researching it and honing my articulation of it. It is my expectation that intelligent readers will recognize in my rationale ideas that on some level they've intuited on their own, but have had yet to fully grasp and utilize. Among this group, I surmise, will be some who feel passionately about the opportunity presented herein, and who are ready to train as leaders of a cultural revolution, a new renaissance, if you will. If you see yourself in this description when you finish reading the book, I urge you to contact me by calling me at... That number is not even real anyway. Or emailing me at cronus@titanians.org. Also, Bob is a member of our chat group, and you can find him listed under members if you click the name of the group. And you can message him on Telegram that way. Part 1, Introduction. Chapter 1, The Shared Vision. For starters, I want to congratulate you on your decision to be a participant in the game of life, and especially on your awareness that human society isn't what it could be, and that the efforts of folks like us can make a real difference in the world. While some of you may think of yourselves as ordinary, the fact is you are not. You are extraordinary. I know this because for many years I have searched for people with your level of awareness and became frustrated with how unusual they are. So again, my congratulations. My purpose in writing this book is to share with you a dream that I've held in my heart for almost 30 years. A dream that began with a question, and to recruit you as a founding member of a new kind of institution that I call Titania. Did you ever ask yourself? I recognized almost 40 years ago that our species is following a highly self-destructive path, one that could easily make us as extinct as the dinosaurs. So I asked myself, what would have to happen for humanity to thrive, to flourish, to truly overcome the serious societal problems such as crime, hunger, poverty, violence, and war that humanity has faced for thousands of years and still faces today, and will probably face into the future? Did you ever ask yourself this question? Soon after I asked this question, I found a satisfying answer, which led to more questions. The answer is, for humanity to flourish, its institutions must consistently make ethical decisions. Simple, almost rhetorical, right? But unfortunately, most people have only an intuitive sense of what the word ethical means, whereas a much more exact and precise understanding is required. So, obviously, a massive educational effort has to be part of the game plan. Thanks to my mentor, John David Garcia, I also learned how people committed to acting ethically can form organizations and institutions that are equally ethical. There is a specific formula for doing this, as I'll explain as we go along. This knowledge left me with one burning question. How can I find enough ethical people to implement what I know? You are that answer. So hang on to your hat. I'm about to amplify your dream. But first, I have to tell you a little bit about myself. Chapter 2, My Background. The main things you need to know about me are these. My life is primarily driven by curiosity. At the age of 5, I got a hold of my parents' alarm clock and took it apart because I wanted to see how it works. Oops! My folks weren't happy about this, but my father, the famous physicist Boris Podolsky, understood my urge to know how the world works and encouraged me in this ever after. My father also taught me at an early age the basic principles of science and the scientific method, which exist only to distinguish true information from false information. This is the reason we have science in the first place, to distinguish true information from false information. So I became a devotee of truth and remain so to this day. For my first career, I spent 10 years doing mathematical physics and systems analysis in industry and government. Then I spent 25 years doing psychotherapy in private practice. My father was Boris Podolsky, the physicist who achieved considerable notice for his 1935 work with Albert Einstein on what came to be known as the EPR paradox. The resulting paper was entitled, "Can Quantum Mechanical Description of Physical Reality be Considered Complete?" We now refer to it as quantum entanglement. Of Boris, Einstein once said, "Podolsky goes directly to the heart of the problem." Boris was also a brilliant teacher. So I was very early on introduced to the scientific method, logic, and the operational point of view, the philosophical cornerstones of science. As a student, I followed in my father's footsteps by studying math and physics in high school, Williams College, the University of Cincinnati, Xavier University, the University of Hawaii, where I received National Science Foundation Fellowship for research in quantum electrodynamics, and Harvard. I have a master's degree in theoretical physics. Overlapping my formal education and subsequently, I worked in industry, Avco, GE, Bendix, and in the civil service, USAF Avionics Lab and Coast Guard HQ, performing mathematical modeling of complex physical systems such as atomic reactors, guided missiles, electron microscope lenses, external combustion engines, and the like. After 10 years of this work, I tired of the Dilbert lifestyle and its bureaucratic environment, so I got trained in various methods and techniques of psychotherapy and operated a private practice in this field for some 25 years. During this period, some of my clients were business people, so I studied business systems and entrepreneurship and consulted in this field. I use my experience in systems analysis together with psychology to enhance the effectiveness of my clients. In 1984, I met John David Garcia, the brilliant author of Creative Transformation, and remained friends with him until his death in 2001. Under John David's tutelage, I came to understand the value of the field of ethics that I had scorned as a young man. I have since seen it as the most important field anyone can master because, through the lens of ethics, one can make vastly better decisions than one can by any other means. By 1992, I had begun writing articles and subsequently books about ethics, law, and government. My research in the intervening year showed me unequivocally that the institutions that we usually look to solve societal problems were actually the cause of all the major problems that our species faces. After the work I had done analyzing physical systems, the analysis of societal systems turned out to be a very simple matter. The three big offenders in this respect turned out to be big business, especially big banking business, organized religion, and government. Borrowing an idea from Star Trek, I have coined the phrase BORG when referencing these three institutions collectively: big banking, organized religion, and government. Today I've written 7 books about the BORG problem and what can be done about it. 4 are available on Amazon. Finally, some answers. So here's the long and short of it. Humanity is facing a huge problem. A solution exists. Hoo-ha! The rest of this book is dedicated to filling in the details concerning the problem and the solution. To better understand our current situation, let's examine the big problem through the lens of scientific systems analysis.
Wow, you have the sort of eclectic interests that I have had over my years, but I haven't translated them into actually, working in different fields, but just studying them or interest. But man, I just find that amazing. I applaud it. I just think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
I do think we're hopefully coming into a new renaissance where for the young guys that might have been the nerds and the geeks of yesteryear will be the ones that the women swoon over instead of the athletes, and but to have that sort of vast interest and actually fulfill work activity in them I think is fantastic, and actually brings a lot more credibility to the work or at least it could. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but it definitely, I think it adds to the weight of the work.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah, I didn't know all of this background either, that you had spent so much time in the hard sciences, but it does actually, when I read other works of yours, it does make sense because of such attention to scientific research and scientific detail that you've done over the years, studying the intentional communities and things like that.
Well, I've done more than 25 years of psychotherapy, but but I don't think you mean the same way.
Yeah, I've made some advances on the psychotherapy field. I've written, one of my books is called Soul Bonding, and it's about personal growth and how one comes about doing it. And I actually have made what I believe to be some improvements in the methodology of increasing one's self-awareness. So that's grist
cool.
for another book. We can do that one another time.
Well, I'm in for that one too, because that sounds really cool.
All right.
Nice. I'm wondering about what were you feeling inside of yourself that made you want to switch from such hard sciences into the like psychotherapeutic field?
Well, working in industry, I knew there was something wrong. I didn't know what it was, but I was really uncomfortable with dealing with the people that I was dealing with in that field. And then I worked for government, and I had a similar feeling. There's something wrong here. This isn't the way it should be or the way it could be. And still, I didn't have a clear sense of what that meant. And my life was a mess, frankly. I failed at marriage 3 times, and only towards the end of that period did I realize that the common thread running through those failures was me. And just about at that point in time, a woman friend, actually the wife of a friend of mine, took me aside one day and she said, "Bob, you might benefit from some psychotherapy." And frankly, I was insulted because I thought that psychotherapy was for people who are crazy or sick or something of the sort. And so I reacted rather defensively. And I did wind up asking her, "What makes you think that there's anything to this psychotherapy stuff?" And she said, "Well, I spent most of my adult life stuttering or stammering. And I saw a therapist, spent 2 hours with him, and I haven't stuttered since." I was astonished. "What? You sat in a room with a stranger, and after 2 hours of doing whatever you were doing with him, you stopped stuttering after most of your adult life you had been stuttering. How could that come about?" And I asked her that. And she said, "I don't know how it came about, but the guy is still around. You could go see him and ask him." Well, my curiosity had gotten the better of me. And I went and met the guy, a fellow named Jim Cox. And within a very short period of time, I realized that this therapy stuff was really good, extraordinarily good. It was within a couple of months, my life was changing dramatically. My outlook on the world was changing for the better. And I decided then that I wanted to train in that field. And Jim Cox had a training program, which I joined. And I've never looked back. It was one of the most important, beneficial decisions that I ever made. And later on, I realized that the way psychotherapy is done generally is not optimum because they use a clinical model for it. And so I then invented another model, a better model, an educational model that achieves similar results faster, more effectively, and more cheaply than the standard psychotherapeutic model. And that's when I invented soul bonding. So that was the transition that I went through. And I had some 10 years of intensive therapy myself, without which I would not have gotten the benefits that I wound up getting. And my fourth marriage was a great success. 38 years of a relationship that got better and better and better until my wife died. But during those 38 years, it was a wonderful experience. And I couldn't have had that if I hadn't had that therapeutic experience. So that's my history in terms of how I transitioned into being the therapist, and since then into being a more general purpose ethicist. That's how I see myself now. I'm basically teaching applied ethics to anyone who wants to learn. I hope that answers your question.
Well, I was going to ask, are you familiar with the new energy medicine, emotional freedom techniques using tapping along the Chinese meridian sites? And
yeah, I've studied that.
How does that?
I've studied 15 different methods of doing psychotherapy. And out of that, I picked 6 that are particularly useful in my own personal experience. And then I took those 6 methods and combined them into soul bonding, which is an educational protocol rather than clinical. And there is a distinct difference. So yeah, I'm aware of a number of other therapies, and I use some of those from time to time if my usual method of doing soul bonding is not proving to be as effective as I want it to be. I have these other tools to fall back on, and that's very, very useful.
Cool. I'm excited to read that book. Yeah. Right. Self-improvement, whatever, has been my hobby since, if we call it a hobby or a destiny, since I was probably about 12 or so.
That's a good word. Yeah.
I look forward to reading that and getting through this. Sorry, we were talking to each other. I just like it's like you're the type of person that I would just love to ask a bunch of questions, because I've got so many different interests, and you have at least, a broader perspective than I do in different areas. It's like, that's where I really think I've met a lot of people, and I have people in my family who like to be the smartest person in the room. And I've always said, I don't like being the smartest person in the room. I want to talk to the smartest person in the room. I want to find the smartest person in the room, but I don't necessarily like being the smartest person in the room. There's a lot of people who, and unfortunately, it's usually people who aren't the smartest person in the room that really long to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've noticed that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I invite you, if you wish, to contact me through Telegram, and we can have conversations that are not part of this book club. I'm open to that.
Oh, thank you so much. I also have dreams of doing some sort of podcast or something like that, because I think, I don't know, knowledge is fun for me. I discovered the library as a child.
Mm-hmm.
I think, unfortunately, we have a few generations now that have never experienced the joy of wandering through a library, going down physical rabbit holes before you could do it electronically.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I can date it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not hyperbole. You know, our library opened in 1974. I was 10 years old, and I just fell in love with it. You know, and
I can relate
for
to
a
that.
lot of people, yeah, a lot of people just don't realize how great, you know, the exploration of knowledge can be, and is. You know, and nothing stops you. I mean, it's just. So, anyways, yes, I just may take you up on that. Thank you so much.
Okay. I've often said that real education is nothing more than stimulating the curiosity and teaching people how to get the answers to their questions. Once you do that, there's no stopping them.
I
There's no
love that.
stopping them. You know, people are just going to go ahead and do that once they catch on to it.
Hmm.
To me, that's the ultimate description of real education. Encourage creativity and curiosity and teach people the means of fulfilling that curiosity. And that's all you have to do. That's it. That makes them educated because they'll spend the rest of their lives doing that. Hoo-ha.
Yes, and I think that's an essence of what the homeschool movement is realizing how eager young minds are to learn because
Yeah,
of because they're curious, and it's like
exactly.
how stifling is the education system. I mean, I was in elementary school when I discovered homeschooling for myself, and I obviously they didn't call it homeschooling then or anything like that. I remember, like all other kids, you know, you saw kids on TV and in the movies, and it's like, God, I'd love to be an actor. It's like, well, and you realize that, you know, oh, they have tutors on the set. That's how they're able uh, to be on the set to do acting. And I'm like, I can remember the swing set I'm swinging on facing the school, and it was elementary, so I had to be sixth grade or less, thinking I would do better traveling with my parents who were, you know, traveling to Europe or something like that. You know, they were, you know,
Mhm.
my dad and my stepmom. It's like I would do better going with them to discover a new place that they were going to as a world traveler and have a tutor
Mhm.
than being stuck here because I really didn't like this being in school.
I don't
So,
know if you've seen it. There's a book by a woman named Dana Martin,
oh yeah.
Dayna, Dana Martin,
Mhm.
a book called Radical Unschooling.
Mm.
Excellent book. I have a high regard for her and for the books she's written. She wrote that. She also wrote Peaceful Parenting, that
Mhm.
explains how to raise children without ever punishing them. And those two books are landmarks from my perspective. I think these are really important works of literature that have conveyed these two messages, really important messages. So,
I've discovered a lot of lay people who have academic level innovations, and I think they really do need to be promoted um, and held in higher esteem than a lot of these academics that have proven themselves to be worthless and um,
absolutely.
yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Bob, I had a question
Yep.
about this part of your history here where you made a transition from psychotherapy to teaching ethics. It just struck me because I remember learning. I wanted to be a psychologist in school, and they put you through like career counseling and stuff nowadays, career class where you learn about how careers work and whatever. And so I learned a lot about what you do as a psychologist, and particularly I wanted to be like a prison psychologist, or like maybe even on like death row, or with the kind of people that others felt uncomfortable around or couldn't deal with, because it didn't bother me, and I thought they were the extreme ends of the cases are the most interesting. And
Hmm.
so I looked into being like a profiler and all that kind of stuff, but I just wanted to help them more than just catch them. And so I thought I wanted to be the kind of psychologist, and all the different studying of they basically said that there's these rules you have to follow as a psychologist, and like your board and your license hook you into, and this is how you have to do it. And one of the main rules they said is you cannot discuss any kind of morality with your patients. And I thought, well, that is simply not going to work. I was like, that most people are in pain because they're doing something wrong. Because if they stop doing it, they'd be in less pain. And so
Right.
I don't know how I'm going to get by if I can't tell people how to get out of the pain they're in. At the time, I didn't know that, like, you know, your job is kind of to sell medicine and not let them get cured. But I didn't understand how that worked at the time. I just thought, well, this system isn't going to function like that. There's no way. And I'm going to go work on death row and be like, no, it's cool. You only killed like 6 people. It's fine. Like, you can't not moralize, you know, and then try to help them in any way. Because they're dealing with the guilt from having done a bad thing. You can't be like, no, it was fine.
Right.
So, you know, it struck me that was the leap that you made, was from like psychotherapy to like, well, I'm going to teach people how to not even have this problem in the first place, maybe.
Right. Exactly. You put your finger right on it. That's exactly what happened. I still do soul bonding with people individually and occasionally do groups and workshops, but my focus is on the applied ethics and articulating that in a way that people can understand. So I too cannot imagine doing personal growth work and not address the questions concerning ethics and morality. It's really important stuff. Very important.
Would you say that part of the psychological dilemma that we may face, and this kind of goes to, you know, I'm a big, or at least I read a lot of Nathaniel Branden, and with his concept of self-esteem as the reputation we have for ourselves, with ourselves, part of that has to include our ethics, and to the degree that we are living up to it, or if we haven't even, you know, whether we have even delineated them in our own mind, in our own sense of what our ethics are, and then on top of that, whether we're living up to it or not.
Right. Very important. It's been my observation that there are certain obstacles that people face based on early experiences that they've had before the age of 5. Some as early as when they're just a month old or a few days old. And the dynamic that becomes problematic is what are called double binds. So, for instance, if you traumatize an infant sufficiently early enough, they wind up believing that they can exist only if they do not need, and they attempt to deny having any needs, which makes it very difficult, of course, to fulfill their needs. It's hard to get what you need if you are denying that you have needs, but that's a double bind. A little bit later, trauma will create a double bind that says, I can get what I need as long as I remain dependent. Well, that's pretty absurd because it's quite possible to be independent and get your needs met. But that's the double bind that people get stuck in, and they remain dependent on others. And then the next double bind that people encounter, depending on how and when they get traumatized, is I can be independent as long as I don't let myself be close to other people. Being close, of course, means being willing to communicate my feelings to them and about them, and being comfortable when they do the same thing. So it's another double bind. Still later, trauma. I can be close if I give up my freedom becomes another double bind, where people present themselves to you as, I'll do anything you want. I'll be anyone you want. You love me, and I'll be whoever you want me to be. I'll be your slave. Hidden behind that mask is they want you to be their slave. Oops, problematic. And finally, there's another double bind that says basically, I can be free if I don't love. Out of fear of becoming the slave, there are people who characteristically have this double bind. They will not love because they are afraid they'll lose their freedom. Unfortunately, those folks are never free to love. Oops, big mistake. So these double binds then become the touchstones for recognizing the efficacy of a therapeutic intervention. If someone's life is ruled by one or more, and it's often more than one or more of these double binds, you know that you've had a successful intervention when the double bind is no longer in play, and they can actually have both sides of the coin, as it were, without the conflict. So this is explained in detail in my book on soul bonding, but it's very much tied up with how personal growth and ethics and morality come together. Very much.
That is amazing. I won't reveal which one I will pick. Which ones? Like pick a card.
Well,
I know which ones I have, but is there any difference in severe situations where parents, like I suspect it, not a diagnosis because I can't diagnose, but very narcissistic personalities in my circle. That's got to have a bigger effect than, quote, normal families or parents or whatever.
That goes with the double bind of insisting on being free by not loving.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the characteristics of narcissism and the narcissistic character structures. So yeah, knowing your own character structure and your own double binds is a very big piece of recovery. Very big piece. If you don't know your double binds and you don't know your own character structure, you're kind of at a loss as to, okay, in what direction do I grow?
Yeah, and this is why I have a big issue with mindset. The people that promote mindset, and I like to say that I really don't think my problem is that I haven't blown myself enough kisses, because
right.
There is a point where you get really kind of fed up with that. And I said I work in real estate investing community and rehabbing, and it's like you can talk about the quality of the paint and how if you just paint it the right color, the room's going to look great. But there's some of us here who have mold on the wall, and you keep not addressing the mold on the wall. And the more you tell me to keep painting it with the mindset and the positive this, the more frustrating it gets when the mold comes through.
Right.
And we haven't solved that problem. And that problem for a lot of people is the real issue. It's not,
right.
It's not like I don't know what I really, really want. I don't know what I enjoy, really, really enjoy or whatever. And it's not that I haven't really, really tried, because I've tried. I've painted it 1,000 times,
Mind mold.
What's that?
Mind mold.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a mind mold, and you're trying to extract it or neutralize it or whatever the good metaphor would be. And none of those strategies really, really work for it. And they just make you feel like, what is wrong with me? I keep trying, and it hasn't been solved. But
right.
Definitely there's I really believe that you're onto something. I think a lot more people are coming up with different avenues of approach that are not so superficial, and in the and it may not be their intention, but in the end you end up feeling like, well, aren't you telling me that I'm broken too?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good observation on your part, and more power to you for intuiting that That's great.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, that was really deep, man. I wonder if what the mindset of the people who would say that, I think what they're seeing is that, like, those things that they're asking you to do, like have the belief in yourself and like clearly envision, like make your vision board or whatever, right? Like, I think it's like they're seeing that as those are the activities that a person without the mold would do, right? And so they think that maybe if you do those activities, it'll like reverse engineer and take care of the problem, right? But that the I don't know how to put it, like uncenteredness with the world is a much more basic problem than
Right.
I think of the word than a belief, like a belief that you are, capable of X thing, or you will achieve X thing in the future. And to some extent too, a lot of that stuff to me sounds a lot like they're trying to, it says like a blind faith belief, like they want to, like almost like if you just repeat it to yourself enough, you'll just start to believe it, which is probably not good. It's not a good spirit in which to do things. Generally, like trying to fool yourself. I think that the basic traumas and things that are at the core of how most people have been. Every person, as I see it, is sort of a mirror or like a crystallized fragment of the universal human subconscious, and one of like maybe of their nation or their people, right? And so each nation has certain things that it is the way, they're all violent, right? So like there's no like utopic place, right? And so they all exist, they all can continue to do that violence and quote unquote thrive by ignoring, like blanking out certain parts of the psyche or certain kind of behavior, certain kind of feelings, right? Like, well, we all, like we did with slavery, like, yeah, we're going to pretend we don't hurt when we see other people and change. And like that, and as long as we all pretend that, it's fine. But until somebody starts speaking up about it, like, yo, shut the fuck up, it's fine, like, to make some excuses or whatever, but they're not, those excuses are like top level, what's that thing called, frontal brain activities, but that's not where the basis comes from. The basis of, they're saying they're just using the frontal brain to like quiet down the rest of the brain, but the real answer that they're giving is like, if you talk about that, it's all going to fall. And so like there's a lot of that within an individual person too, where like you don't even want to bring up, like to go back and heal those things. It's almost a fear that it will like collapse kind of structures that are built. And the
Right.
more that a person in like hammers stuff into their head with the blind faith, like you're building a house of cards on the structure that's not going to last. Like it looks like it's tall and stuff, but as soon as you go back to heal any of that basic stuff, is going to collapse the whole thing, because like it shouldn't have been there in the first place, really. That's a place you get to once you've done the healing and things, right? Once you're more centered, you get to where you're like, yeah, I just wake up every day and I believe in myself and everything gets done. But that's not like, it's kind of like the Hollywood actors who are like, top 1% of beautifulness for mankind or whatever. And then they say, yeah, you just got to work hard and then you just get here. And that's because that's what they did. They just worked hard and they got there, but they got there because they're, born with amazing genetics that other people don't have. So they think like the experience of their life is like, they're not being dishonest. Like the experience of their life was like, I worked hard and I had success and I got it. And everyone told me it's because I'm so great. But they did not see in this whole picture where like 99.9% of people don't look like you.
Right.
Well, and that's with athletic ability as well, where the athletes have a natural athletic talent, and the recipe is to practice like they do, and it's like, yeah, 99% of the rest of the world can practice the way these guys did, and they're they're not going to have that natural talent. I think there's a good news though, that I do think even Tony Robbins is beginning to move into the heal the trauma aspect of it, and which I think is helpful. It just it takes it out of the sort of charlatan world or rah-rah realm and puts it more in the realistic realm.
Well, Tony was a protege of John Grinder, who was one of the founders of neurolinguistic programming. And when I met Tony, he was making himself famous by leading the firewalks that he got to be well known for. And I actually did a Tony Robbins fire walk as a reward or a thank you from John Grinder, who had given a 6-month training program that I attended, and at the end of it, he gave us a fire walk with Tony Robbins. So I found that was profoundly helpful because it took the lid off of my expectations of myself. That I basically had the experience of doing something that I could not explain scientifically. And I looked for explanations. There were a lot of people saying, "Oh well, your body does this or your body does that, and that makes it happen that you get to walk across red hot coals without getting harmed." And on examination, all of those explanations fail. To this day, I do not know of a credible mechanism by which the human body is able to walk barefoot across red hot coals without any harm. And yet I did it, which tells me I can do things that I can't explain. I can do things far beyond what I can explain. And I've had a few other experiences along those lines since then. And I think it's important in personal growth to learn that we have the potential for what you might think of as superpowers. We may or may not realize those potentials, but we have them. It's built into us, it's hardwired, and we can learn to tap into those abilities, and wonderful things happen. And I have been offered many times the opportunity to do additional firewalks, but I've turned them down because I got from the firewalk what I needed. Just taking the lid off of my expectations of myself. That's what I needed, and that's what I got. And it's worthwhile for that if you're in a position to do it, and if that's what you need.
Yes, and I think Wim Hof and his cold is also doing that. So there's different areas where we can test the limits of what we thought we could do.
Right. Good example.
I do like that, and
yeah,
and I'm willing to look at my lifetime because I know it's kind of blossomed in my lifetime. You know, there is a self-indulgent quality to the self-help movement. You know, there is a sort of and I think even Wayne Dyer talked about this at the beginning of this era of self-help, where he talked about the lady that lived next door. He was seeing clients at his home on Long Island, and the lady next door had like 6 kids, and she was always busy. And it's like chatting at and Dyer's getting his his high-end clients, and he chats with the neighbor. He goes, if anybody should be having struggles, it's you. You work so darn hard. You've got all these kids, and you're doing, you're just handling it. She goes, well, I've been thinking about having a nervous breakdown. Like, yeah, I'm just too busy with these damn kids. I just was thinking about it. So I definitely think that there's an element. I'm willing to look at all of the aspects of it, and I love them all. I mean, really, I can criticize some of them or recognize their shortcomings, but in the end, it's a smorgasbord, and you got to pick the one that's that really satisfies and solves your own problems.
Yeah.
And luckily, there's just a lot of choices now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's important to have fun. I often tell myself, if I'm not having fun, I'm doing something wrong. So life has become a lot more fun.
I like that. I need to do that. Yes, add that fun element into my life. I will take that as advice, actually, or a reminder.
Okay. All right.
I remember when I was a child, people were always telling me, like, this is not a game, Don. This is not a game. And eventually I came up, like, out of nowhere, as it happens sometimes, with the retort of, like, everything in life is a game. It's all a game or a toy, or you're not looking at it right. And then they're like, shut up, go in the corner.
Yeah. Game of life. I love it. I do. For those who want to look ahead, I want to mention that Chapter 4 is where most of the meat of the discussion of ethics is contained. So chapter 3 is good for analysis of the problem, but chapter 4 presents a lot of the solution to the problem. And so for those of you wishing to read ahead and kind of get a head start, chapter 4 is where it's at. And also, I want to mention that later on in the book, there are a couple of pieces of fiction, because I realized that most of what I wrote in the book is for the left brain, and I also want to feed the right brain. So I wrote a couple of pieces of fiction. One is called The Legend of Odoka, the Castle Builder, and the other is called The Real Story of Moses and the 10 Suggestions. So those are fiction, and I hope you enjoy them. And I'm looking forward to carrying on through this whole discussion and then moving on to another book. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank those of you listening to the recording of this meeting for watching and listening. I want to cordially invite you to the live Friday evening version of it. And I especially want to thank you, Don, for making this possible, for actually initiating this group and inviting me to take part. I've actually wanted to do something like this for a long time, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be doing it with you guys now.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something I thought was an important thing, because I just see so many people there are so many good things in books, I mean, it seems silly to say, really, but books are really where it's at when it comes to like deep study of knowledge and things, right? And so few people either have their life set up so that there's time to do that, or can calm their mind enough to sit and look at a book, and so I thought something like this was a really good idea. And just two, there are many books that particularly for people interested in human thriving and freedom, need a bit of parsing. For instance, one of the books I wanted to do at some point was a book called Blueprint for Revolution, which is written by one of the color movements started by George Soros, and was actually like how they did what they did. And it's basically a elucidation of how you can use the trickster spirit to like work under a tyrant. Like the tyrants don't know what to do with that. They can handle resistance, but they don't know how to handle you laughing at them and making them a joke all day. And
Right.
so I thought it's fantastic, but something like that also needs a bit of carefulness to it and a bit of filling in around the edges. Where, like there's no mention at all of the fact that he this guy. When he writes the book, there's no mention at all of the fact that he had like international funding from organizations, and the United Nations was tied in with what he was doing. And it's very easy to get a revolution underway when the United Nations agrees with you.
Right. Right. Well, in subsequent meetings, there's a lot of this stuff to talk about. I've got some projects going right now that I will share with you guys along the way, because they're relevant to what we're discussing in the book discussion. And it's very, I'm still to this day, I'm excited about what I do, even though I'm not terribly optimistic about where our species is headed. When I look at the probabilities of different outcomes, I can't say I'm optimistic, but I do have hope. I do manage to stay hopeful in spite of huge obstacles that I see confronting us. And it's a challenge, and I enjoy a challenge. If you don't enjoy a challenge, you shouldn't be having these conversations. These are challenging times, and I suggest we rise to the occasion and make the best of it and have fun doing it. Hallelujah.
Here. I agree.
Yeah, I think people often get down on when you see the scope of the problem, or even approach the scope of the issue of what's going on in the world, that really no one has figured it out yet since the beginning of time. That it seems like a big issue, but I was raised by video games, and so for me, this is just like the normal course of life where you start in your level 1 and none of the enemies are defeated, and this is just how life goes. Like when you start the project, it's not none of it's done, and then you just kind of build your way up there. So it just seems to be a pretty normal case that well, of course it's a big giant issue and it seems really hard. It's supposed to, because that's how you get to level 99, is because the problems are so hard.
Right.
We'll get there.
All right.
It's a lovely place to wrap it up, you guys.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated this. And thank you, Don, too, as well, because like I've told you, this has been an elixir for me, and tonight was with a nightcap. So thank you so much.
I thank you all. You're heroes in my book. You're doing the good work, and I'm just delighted to be a part of it. So, does that mean that we're wrapping it up for the night and we're going to meet again next week? All right.
Sounds good to me.
Have a great week, all of you. Please have a great week. Have fun. Hang in there. All right.
Thank you. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.
Adios.